A lot of positive sounding rhetoric. What underscores that? What happened in these negotiations?
Yeah, very positive rhetoric indeed. I mean, Trump's saying that they're closer than they have ever been to a peace agreement in Ukraine. I mean, we can also say, Tom, that we've never really ever been close, so it may not be saying a whole lot. But according to some of the sources that we spoke to on the U.S. side of those negotiations, they said that consensus was reached on about 90% of the points of this peace agreement between the Ukrainians and the Americans. This, of course, then needs to go to Moscow. What it centers around, the optimism that is about these U.S.-backed security guarantees, and this is the term we keep hearing, these NATO Article 5 like guarantees. Now, no one has ever defined what an Article 5 like guarantee is, but of course the premise is that an invasion on Ukraine would be viewed as sort of potentially an invasion light on the rest of the NATO alliance, and as a consequence the NATO alliance would come to the rescue of Ukraine in some way or another. This would not give Ukraine full NATO membership. It would not give them a seat at the table. It would also probably put, and we're speculating here somewhat, an impediment in terms of the sort of free movement of NATO troops and weaponry into Ukraine, which is, of course, the sort of red line for the Russians, which they really see NATO incursion as a sort of instigating factor of this war. But that's the sort of positive side of it. Of course, there's still this major question on territorial boundaries. The Russians said they don't want to engage in any kind of discussion about ceasefires or ceasing any kind of hostilities until the entirety of the Donbass has been sort of either surrendered or in some ways been part of this framework, and that has not yet happened, Tom. And this is, we should say, as the Europeans get more positive about progress on this deal, the Ukrainians get more positive on progress of this deal. We have not heard from the Russian side yet, and the more positive the Ukrainians and the Europeans are, presumably the less positive the Russians will be. So we're going to have to wait to see what they have to say after these days of negotiations in Berlin.
Yeah, that's crucial, isn't it, Ollie? And you have to question where the pressure is. You can see the U.S. pressure on Ukraine at this point. Where is the U.S. pressure on Russia? And what else, Ollie, do we know about this 20-point plan?
Yeah, as for the additional pressure on Russia, we should say that there were those significant sanctions that were put in place only a couple of weeks ago, Tom, on Lukoil and Rosneft, which does have a major effect on the Russian economy, though it's not something, as you rightly point out, that the Americans have really been trumpeting or trying to put additional pressure on. There are, of course, many other sanction barriers that the U.S. could address, but we also got a little bit more of a readout from the European side here. This is a statement that was signed by the leaders of France, UK, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, Poland, Italy, after those talks in Berlin yesterday, saying that another parts of this 20-point plan and what they could include. Among them would say that the Ukrainian armed forces, which should remain at a peacetime level of 800,000 troops. Remember, the initial plan of 28-point plan asked for a reduction in the size of the Ukrainian military to 600,000, that there would be also a, quote, multinational force Ukraine made up of contributions from willing nations, the coalition of the willing framework, that would also potentially include operating within Ukraine. A ceasefire monitoring sort of system that would be led by the United States, and a legally binding commitment to take measures to restore peace and security in the case of a future armed attack. These measures may also include armed forces. So these are some of these sort of details, it seems, that the Europeans are trying to put into the security framework going forward. We should also say that there was a clause about reconstruction and what should happen in terms of compensation from the Russian side to the Ukrainians. This, of course, Tom, as you know, is the sort of major issue that is in focus for Europeans this week. Those Russian assets, whether or not they will move to seize those or monetize them in some way to get a loan to Ukraine. And that is something we're going to have to wait till Thursday to find out if European leaders can make progress on that point.